Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 287. Shi Shengpeak. Fate is impossible to escape. Jiangshi didn't say a word. Xuemeng also did not say anything. After a long time had passed, Jiangshi finally said with an extremely uneasy and sullen look on his face, "Since you've heard it all, I don't need to say more. Go and take care of the rest of the matters in accordance to the rules of the Shi Shengpeak." Jiangshi turned his gaze away. He didn't even want to look at Xuemeng again. "Your mother left. I will be waiting for you at the foot of the mountain." Xuemeng moved, but it was just a meaningless movement. All the hot blood in his body seemed to have been sucked out. Just 2 or 3 movements of his knuckles had exhausted all of his strength. Xuemeng suddenly turned to stare at the quiet loyalty hall. The blood on the carpet was no longer clear against the flames, but his father was still lying on the ground. When he wasn't smiling, he looked old and his wrinkles were very distinct. He had white hair on his temples. Jiangshi, on the other hand, always looked as if he was in his early 30s, always in the prime of his life. Xuemeng slowly took a few steps forward, then stopped. "You can go." Jiangshi turned his head and saw Xuemeng's lonely back. Xuemeng said, "I refuse to acknowledge you as my father. You are not my father." After he finished speaking, he slammed the door. After a while, Jiangshi heard Xuemeng's hoarse and sorrowful cries coming from inside, breaking his heart. Jiangshi stood in the cold wind for a long time, until his hands and feet felt frozen, and then he slowly walked down the mountain. At the foot of the mountain, most of the cultivators had dispersed in fear of the heavenly phoenix flames. Only the Taxu Palace had a few disciples left, among them was Mei Hangxiu. Seeing that Jiangshi had come out and according to etiquette, the younger generation members of the Taxu Palace bowed to him in respect. They then whispered, "Sect leader Jiang." Jiangshi could feel the muscles on his face stiffen. He pursed his lips and turned his brown eyes onto Mei Hangxiu. "Why? Aren't you leaving?" Mei Hangxiu said in a gentle but cold tone, "I'm waiting for an old friend." Jiangshi understood who he was referring to and said, "He won't be able to get down for a while." Mei Hangxiu said, "Then I'll have to wait for a while, even if it's 3 or 4 days. If there's nothing else, I'll just stay here." He paused for a moment before continuing, "Also, sect leader Jiang. The palace master has asked me to give a message to you." Unable to vent his anger, Jiangshi asked, "What is it?" Mei Hangxiu bowed. "The palace master has decided not to blindly follow the words of the deity's descendants, the Tianyan Pavilion. He has also stopped collaborating with the various sects in the world of cultivation. Sect leader Jiang is the leader of the cultivation sects. From today onwards, for future actions, you do not have to consider the Taxu Palace." Jiangshi was silent for a moment. With an unreadable expression on his face, he asked, "Are you planning to stand alone outside in the cultivation world? It's scary to stand alone without any help." Mei Hangxiu's eyes were still filled with happiness and a smile, but his expression was somewhat cold. "However, the most undesirable thing is blind obedience and following the words of the so-called deity's descendants." Jiangshi stared at him. He felt angry, stifled and powerless for no reason. Back then, when he saw Nangang Lu sitting in this position, he only felt that many of Nangang Liu's decisions were ridiculous and laughable. But when he really did reach the step, he discovered that there were many things that he could not help himself with. Was it their intention to kill Mo Ran? To blindly listen to the Tianyan Pavilion, was he sincere? He had tried his best to dissuade them from going against Shi Shengpeak, but the sects all retorted that as the leader of the cultivation world, what could they do in the end? In the past, he could even lead Gai Yuye to stay out of this matter, having his own attitude and fortitude. And when he ascended to the position, when Gai Yuye became the greatest sect under the heavens, he discovered that he already had nowhere to return to. In the end, he would become the next Nangang Lu. Jiangshi closed his eyes and left without a word. Mei Hangxiu bowed to him as he was well versed in etiquette, and then he bowed again behind him. He said lightly, "Greetings to you, sect leader Zhang. Farewell to the cultivation world." He did not reply. Dressed in green clothes with gold threads and dark patterns embroidered on them, he walked away without looking back. Previously, he had ascended the mountain and replaced Nangong Liu's glory from yesterday. The audience burst into applause and cheers. At that time, he had thought that he would definitely be different from his former self, that he would be able to rely on his own strength to change the sun, the moon, and the world. At that time, he was ambitious, hot-blooded, and greedy. But now, he understood. It turned out that the applause of that day was not to welcome a brilliant deity. Instead, it was a funeral for a free-spirited soul. From then on, the Jianghu was vast, so is the world. It was easy for them to meet sect leader Zhang, but it was difficult to find the real Jiangxi. After Xuemeng buried his parents, he had never left the Shisheng Peak. Later, when the heavenly fire was extinguished, Mei Hangxiu was ordered to go up the mountain to search for him. Finally, he found the unconscious Xuemeng in the Sky Frosty Hall and brought him back to the Taxiu Palace in Kunlun Mountains. At the same time, the palace master of Taxiu Palace announced that from then on, there would no longer be a need to support Kunlun, and Kunlun would no longer be bound by the laws of the cultivation world. Thus, he cut all relationship with other sect off. Later on, Jiangxi summoned everyone to the Lingshan mountain to discuss the recent events. At the meeting, Jiangxi proposed that the important case should be reopened after 3 trials, namely, the court hearing, the people hearing, and the public hearing, and not to listen to the words of a single family. Even though he had yet to point out which sect the family referred to, everyone already understood that he was somewhat dissatisfied with the status of the Tianyan Pavilion. Therefore, Jiangxi's move was strongly refuted. The Tianyan Pavilion was created by a deity. Pavilion Master Mu uses the holy weapon Tianliang for interrogation, which was left behind by a divinity. If sect leader Zhang acts so recklessly, you might be punished by the heavens. There were even some who believed in the Tianyan Pavilion, who were excited about Mu Yanli's words and actions and treated them as a doctrine. They had no idea where he got the courage to rise to their feet at the meeting. The Tianyan Pavilion is the glory of the cultivation world for the past few thousand years. It was because of the presence of the Tianyan Pavilion that many people would hesitate before committing adultery in the cultivation world. Sect leader Zhang, are you going to extinguish the sacred fire in the cultivation world? Jiangxi said in a stern voice, from your point of view, the Tianyan Pavilion is a pure white, immaculate place. The Tianyan Pavilion was founded by a god for 1,000 years, so it can't be wrong. All of us cultivators can ascend into the path of the heavens after death. Sect leader Zhang, if you think that the deities in the sky are wrong, then where is your cultivation belief? There were too many people who were conservative. They were all in a frenzy as they fought to defend the Tianyan Pavilion left behind by a deity. In the end, even though Jiangxi's face was ashen, he was still powerless to contend against them. In the end, it didn't matter. But paper could not contain fire, and the truth would eventually surface. After the Shisheng Peak had been disbanded, the chaos did not slow down. Instead, it became more and more intense. 3 days later, a violent storm began in Shu. The first to lose control of themselves was the people of Wuchang town. A group of people dressed in mourning cloth and wearing filial clothes headed towards the upper cultivation world's Tianyan Pavilion, insulting them in protest. When did the Shisheng Peak accept children? Where did the Tianyan Pavilion found such beasts? To actually accuse the Shisheng Peak of thief. Can your conscience rest? Cultivate, all you do is cultivate. You close your eyes and cultivate. Cultivators, Wuchang town is at the foot of the mountain. Why didn't you dare come to the foot of the mountain when you were investigating about the crime? The group of heartless traitors you found are simply lackeys you used to cover your own brutality and ugliness. You're nothing but murderers. Please clear the name of sect leader Shuet. Clear the name of sect leader Shuet. The old cultivator who was saved from the Linyi tribulation fire had tears in his eyes. His eyes were filled with anger as he shouted, "You want to frame us, you are not humans at all. You are evil beings." Some cultivators could not bear to watch any longer, so he raised his sword and said angrily, "Isn't that enough?" The Tianyan pavilion was set up by divinity. With all the obscenities in his mouth, he's not afraid of going to hell after death. Everyone was silent for a while. Suddenly, a storyteller took out a fan, pointed it at the door and sneered, "Go to hell." Then, esteemed cultivators, listen carefully. He cleared his throat and continued in a controlled voice, "The Tianyan pavilion is not as good as the pigsty." The crowd burst into laughter as they clapped their hands to show their speed. One of the young masters sighed, "Teacher, this is the most exciting part you've heard in the past 10 years. That's right. The Tianyan pavilion is not as good as the pigsty." Shouts rose and fell one after another. The cultivator's face was as pale as a pig's liver. He could neither curse nor retort, so he stood still for a moment, then left with a pale face. Because these people were commoners without spiritual energy, the Tianyan pavilion simply didn't place them in their eyes, allowing them to freely make a ruckus. However, they did not expect that more and more people would arrive from all over the place. On the second day, the disciples of the pavilion finally could not hold themselves back anymore and reported to Mu Yanli. "Pavilion Master, the plaza is already filled with citizens who have come to avenge the death. Do you think we should go out and say something? There's no need to explain it to them. This kind of people would just give up after shouting a few words. They'll leave afterwards." "But now," the disciple mumbled, "more than 1,000 people are blocking the door." "Over 1,000 people." She got up from the rosewood bed and walked over to the window while stepping on the thick leather carpet. The eyes looked down, and from the window of the brocade pavilion, one could see the vast expanse of white that covered the main square of the Tianyan pavilion. The people were all dressed in mourning clothes. Some were cursing loudly, while others were sitting upright on the ground with a stubborn look on their faces. A crease appeared between Mu Yanli's eyebrows. The direct disciple said cautiously, "It's been 2 days and not a single person had left." On the contrary, more and more people had come and joined. The residents of the large and small towns and villages began to rush to the Tianyan pavilion. "If this goes on, we might really be unable to find someone to lie for us and get exposed." Mu Yanli. "Pavilion Master, what should we do?" Mu Yanli pursed her lips, but before she could reply, she heard a warm, jade-like voice from behind her. "If you can't wrap your head around it, then don't." When that disciple saw Hua Binan, he hurriedly bowed his head and greeted him, "Senior Han Linear." Mu Yanli frowned. "Why are you here?" "Not staying with Taxian Jun to guard the place. The spiritual core shards have Albinel fused into his heart. But he won't wake up for a while." She may walk to the window and look down indifferently. "It looks like there are quite a few people. They're really carefree." Mu Yanli looked a little worried. "You're still spouting sarcastic remarks at such a time." "Currently, I relied on the Tianyan pavilion's prestige to keep the situation from going out of control, but I don't know how much longer it can last. There were many fools among those cultivators, but there were also some who were not stupid. If the group of people below were to continue, then I'm afraid that before Taxian Jun is awake, the situation will change greatly." However, she Mei smiled, "Don't worry, Muji. No matter how great the change, the Tianyan pavilion is safe." "What do you mean?" "In order to become an immortal, one must ascend and become an immortal. You shouldn't offend the descendant of the gods of heaven just because you were on the ground." Shi Mei said, "Actually, the Shisheng Peak is innocent. Don't those cultivators know that? Do you not understand whether it is perjury?" At that time, they chose to believe it because they were afraid of a conspiracy at the Shisheng Peak, afraid of Mo Ran. It was because they themselves wanted to eradicate the sect that they were willing to believe the evidence of dozens of people. Shi Mei's fingers touched the windowsill and lightly said, "Their hearts are clear." The personal disciple beside him said, "But let these commoners clamor about it. They can't do anything about it, but we still need an explanation, right?" "So I just said. If you can't, then don't." "What do you mean?" "Let's just drive them away." Mu Yanli. The Tianyan Pavilion could not help but say these words directly, and would not chase people away without a reason. "If you do this, I'm afraid it will attract a lot of criticism." Shi Mei lightly said, "Didn't I explain everything just now?" Whether the Tianyan Pavilion was right or wrong, they already knew. But they would not rise up for a while. By the time they turned around and came back, our Taxian Jun will be already awake. You know what that means. Mu Yanli seemed as if she wanted to say something, but felt a bit conflicted. In the end, she closed her eyes, turned around, and said to the disciple, "Go and disperse them." After the most loyal disciple left, only Mu Yanli and Shi Mingjing were left in the warm pavilion. The two of them stood by the window, watching the scene below. The disciples of the Tianyan Pavilion filed out, their golden white robes rippling in the sunlight. When the commoners saw them coming out, they thought they were finally going to speak, so they all stood up. They surrounded the group of disciples. Because they were so far away, Shi Mei and Mu Yanli weren't able to hear what they were saying, but their anger could be seen with the naked eye. Suddenly, for some unknown reason, a commoner rushed forward to grab the Tianyan Pavilion disciple. He raised his hand and gave him a resounding slap. The scene turned chaotic. Mu Yanli opened her eyes wide, and the crowd below her surged. They pushed and shoved, and the 10-odd Tianyan sect disciples were surrounded with a barrage of fists and kicks. What was this? No matter how calm Mu Yanli was, she just couldn't do nothing when she saw her disciple being publicly insulted and beaten up. She was about to open the window and let the disciples use spiritual energy to protect themselves when her hands were caught. Shi Mei said, "Let them fight." Mu Yanli replied, "The Tianyan Pavilion has a rule that without an order, cultivators are not allowed to attack the common people. If I don't make a sound and the punches and kicks are merciless, they might be in danger of losing their lives." Shi Mei calmly said, "Then one will die." Mu Yanli. Anger can make people lose their reason, especially when a group of people gathered together to beat up a few people. Soon, the crowd froze. They slowly spread out in a small circle. Within the circle was a new disciple who had just entered the Tianyan Pavilion. Mu Yanli couldn't even remember his name. That disciple was lying on the ground and a puddle of blood gradually spread out from underneath his body. Shi Mei let go of Mu Yanli's hand and said, "All right, now we have a reason to crush these ants to death." "Do it." "It's an excuse." As long as an excuse is found, violence and pressure can be easily accomplished. The door to the Tianyan Pavilion opened, and a large number of disciples quickly came out, each of them holding onto a sword as they rushed towards the common people who had no spiritual energy at all. The crowd instantly fell into chaos. They first chased them away, then wielded their swords to kill them. Screams, furious curses, and reprimands intertwined. People dodged, shouted, and frowned, but no one dared to turn around and run. "If you continue to fight with us, don't blame the Tianyan Pavilion for being merciless. Since when did the Tianyan Pavilion have any feelings for us?" Suddenly, a shaky voice rang out from the crowd. It was actually the village head of the Yuliang village. "Today, this old man wants to seek justice for himself. Even if I die here, I won't have any regrets." Ling Er, who was in the village, was even more upset and furious. She stood together with her aunts and uncles in the village and did not retreat. "If you want to kill me, kill me. Today, let us see if you can kill all the people of Shu to block our way." The leader of the Tianyan Pavilion's elite gnashed his teeth and said, "A group of vicious and unruly people lined up to seek death. Seeing the group attack together, the incantation of law flashed. Whoosh! The arrow pierced the ground and burst into golden light. Subsequently, the bright yellow barrier rose into the air and blocked both sides with a loud bang. The Tianyan Pavilion elite bellowed, "Who is it?" A white light shot up into the sky. In the blink of an eye, the horned bow pierced through the clouds and the Fey Wolf's howl pierced through the sky. Amidst this astonishing and powerful spiritual force, a heroic and beautiful cultivator leapt down to the ground. She grasped her bow and stood coldly before the common folk of Shu, her entire body wreathed in smoke. And behind her, stood a Fey wolf that was as tall as two grown men. It had snow-white fur and golden claws, and its eyes were bloodshot as it ruthlessly exhaled. The person in question narrowed her eyes. "Ye Wangzi." Ye Wangzi raised her hand and put away her bow swiftly. With her other hand, she drew her sword and stood alone in the wind. Her gaze was firm and fierce. "It's you again." A person from the Tianyan Pavilion recognized her and glowered at her. "You, remnant evildoer of the Rufeng sect." Ye Wangzi did not utter a word. She took a step forward with her long legs. "Last time I saw you insisting on giving Mo Ran some water, I knew that something was wrong with you." The elite of the Tianyan Pavilion said, "You are indeed in cahoots with Mo Ran. They are all villains." The long sword was unsheathed, flowing like water. Ye Wangzi narrowed her eyes and said, "You all know who the true culprit is. However, there is one sentence that everyone has spoken correctly." She paused for a moment, then opened her mouth again. "I am indeed on the side of Grand Master Mo." The leader of the soldiers said with a cold sneer, "Ye Wangzi, you, a woman, want to fight against us alone." Her eyes flashed with a fiery light, and she suddenly threw the sword in front of her. The valiant spirit had actually managed to directly pierce the long blade that was not a divine level weapon into the stone floor, creating a long crack on the ground. She gritted her teeth and said, "I have tolerated you for a long time. Don't put the word woman on your mouth all day." In the past, when all the cultivators had seen Ye Wangzi, she had always been patient and gentle, always settling things peacefully. It was the first time they had seen her in a rage. Listen carefully. She did not back down as she stared at the men. In the past, the Shisheng Peak had never struck down on our Rufeng sect, and more importantly, they protected the citizens in the Sea of Fire. Even though the Shisheng Peak no longer exists today, I will not let you hurt a single one of them here. No one in the Tianyan Pavilion had ever fought face to face with Ye Wangzi, so they did not know her strength. They only felt that she was a little girl crying beside her young master. Therefore, some people could not help but sneer, "Little girl, do you know what you are saying? With just you alone, you want to protect the group of fallen quail behind you? What a big tone you have! Where did you get your skills from? Then open your eyes wide and see if I have the ability to do so." The scabbard was thrown to the side, and the blade of the sword was like frost. Ye Wangzi did not waste her breath on them anymore. With a snap of her fingers, she leapt onto the Fey Wolf's back with her long legs. Then, she raised her hand to pull out the sword that had been stabbed into the ground and rushed towards the group of cultivators, whether they were contemptuous or waiting. Inside the pavilion, Shimei looked down at the bustling scene without batting an eyelid. His watery lips moved as he sneered, "Humph, I thought I'd never see the female war god again in my previous life. I didn't expect that in the end, she was still a force to reckon with." "War god?" Shimei didn't answer, but looked at Ye Wangzi with a hint of pity. "Elder sister, look. In one's life, there may be many twists and turns. But in the end, the result was the same. What kind of person was she in her previous life? She's fated to never be able to escape." Blood spewed out as the flaming lightning collided. In an instant, the sounds of battle shook the sky. She was actually surrounded by countless blade lights and sword shadows, and the barrier behind her was blocking all the ordinary citizens who could not use spiritual energy. This woman was dressed in black and had a slender waist and long legs. When she held the sword, she was Ye Wangzi. However, the white gold of the agate was perfectly compatible with her, and the quiver of arrows embroidered by Madame Rong fluttered about her waist. At that moment when she was holding the bow, she was once again with Nangongsi. She had experienced much more in this life than she had in her previous life. She had been helpless, lost, and even had such a short time when the clouds opened and the fog cleared. The evening when Nangongsi had gifted her with the jade pendant, the clouds on the Nahi bridge had been perfect. She thought that she could finally relax her tensed chivalrous bones and return to being that gentle girl who cried and laughed without restraint. But Nangongsi died. His death came without warning. Before he left, he even said to Ye Wangzi, who had remained behind to kill the enemy, "I know you're afraid of the dark. I'll be back very soon." But he never came back. Therefore, in the end, Ye Wangzi was still the same as her previous life. She had lost her weakness and her armor. As she slowly digested the remaining tenderness, she slowly accepted her solitude. In her heart, she silently organized 2 funerals for herself. Elder Su died and took away Xiaoyuzi. She had personally buried her foster father's cup of wine, peach, and plum in spring breeze. Nangongsi died and took Miss Ye away. She personally extinguished the torch she had carried for Asi for 10 years. The war god sealed off the graves of girls and women. She turned around and walked alone to the front of the Tianyan pavilion to confront the disciples. Shi Mei looked down at the fierce battle and said to Mu Yanli, "Call out all of the high-ranking disciples of the Tianyan pavilion to come out and fight. This woman cannot be left alive." Mu Yanli was slightly shocked. All of the high-ranking disciples. She is just a girl. Shi Mei smiled. This lady has caused Taxian Jun to suffer a lot in his previous life. If you underestimate her, you'll have to experience how hard her bones are in the future. The gate opened and all the high-level Tianyan pavilion disciples came out. Ye Wangzi kept the barrier open while battling with the crowd. She was still wearing the green crane belt from Junfan Gate, dodging in and out of the way, her hair ribbon fluttering in the wind. Mu Yanli had sent out a death command and the Tianyan pavilion disciples continued to attack her. Although Ye Wangzi was strong enough to deal with a group of enemies, she did not retreat. Add them in. Shi Mei was like a fish watching another fish by the pond. He looked down at the situation below and lightly said, "Anyway, today she delivered herself to my doorstep. I can't let her return alive. Anan, look over there." Suddenly, Mu Yanli interrupted Shi Mei. Following his gaze, Shi Mei saw a layer of blue and silver smoke rising into the sky. It was actually the elders at the Shisheng Peak, leading their disciples here. Due to the protection of Madame Wang, the remaining combat power was still clad in the armor of the Shisheng Peak. Stepping on the dazzling silver sword, it came crashing down from the depths of the clouds, majestically spreading out. Behind them, over 1,000 disciples were glaring at them. The elder Suanji said in a clear voice, "The so-called descendant of a deity in the Tianyan pavilion only knew to bully the few." Elder Tanlang, on the other hand, was gloomy and violent. His brown eyes were fixated on the ground. He did not have so many words to say. The words were succinct and concise. His anger could be clearly seen. "Go to hell." Facing the onslaught of such a torrential storm of soldiers, Shi Mei's face was slightly gloomy. He didn't know whether to laugh or mock him. What a bad fate. In every single war, victory and defeat must first be decided between the ones at Shisheng Peak. As he spoke, he looked at the surging crowd. There was no sign of Chu Wanning in the crowd. After escaping from the Tianyan pavilion, where did Chu Wanning and Mo Ran go? That Mo Ran's chest had been dug up so many times, he was definitely not going to survive. Then what about Chu Wanning? Was he staying by the new tomb of Mo Ran, or had he simply died along with Mo Ran, just like he had in his previous life? Regardless of which possibility it was that had annoyed him, but in Shi Mei's heart, there was a vague sense of unease. He turned and walked back into the house. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to take a look at the situation with Taxian Jun, think of a way to wake him up early. When he wakes up, the gate of time and space, life and death will open once more, no one will be able to stop us." A slender finger caressed the rune of the Tianyan pavilion as the secret room rumbled open. Shi Mei walked down the long stairs and followed the path engraved with exquisite ancient runes. After passing through 3 layers of barriers, he arrived at the deepest part of the stone room. The ground was covered in ice and a mist filled the air. A piece of jade was embedded in the grayish-green dome and it was currently flowing with a holy light. Beneath this piece of jade was a crystal coffin that was emitting a cold air. Shi Mei stopped in front of the coffin and lowered his head to look at the man lying inside the coffin. "Emperor Taxian Jun, Mo Weiyu." His gaze fell on the light array on the man's chest. "You've slept for a long time. You should be ready to get up now, right?" It was clear that his words did not have much of an effect. Taxian Jun's eyes were still tightly shut and his lips were bloodless. The flow of spiritual energy is so chaotic. Shi Mei placed his hand on Taxian Jun's head. After sensing his surroundings carefully, he stared at the handsome face thoughtfully. "Did you have a nightmare?" Naturally, the comatose person would not answer him. His expression was very gentle, as if he was looking at an otherworldly holy weapon that was about to be forged. He said slowly, "Although this is your own spiritual core, but spiritual cores are things that are closely related to the heart. When it merges together, it will at least make you feel uncomfortable." His voice was bewitched and he cast a spell of hypnosis. "Taxian Jun, no matter what you dream of, don't believe it. It's all fake. Come, wake up. Wake up and you can get anything." He lowered his body so that it was almost close to his ear. It was extremely coquettish and alluring. "Shi Mingjing, Chu Wanning, and even your mother will be back soon. Hurry and wake up." He mumbled to the emperor in his dream, "I'll wait for you." End chapter. Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 288. Shi Shangpeak. Grand Master and Emperor. It was a dream. Taxian Jun opened his eyes and found himself standing in a vast expanse of land. The clouds were a deep red and they were so low that they could be easily touched. There were lush reeds all around, floating in the air, and there were people whispering among the reeds, and there were people laughing. Some people were crying, and those sounds were very soft. It was as if a veil had brushed past the tip of their fingers, and the sounds were like the contact of water. He walked on, startling the dark blue flurries in the depths of the reeds. Then he saw a great, still river, larger and slower than any great river he had seen before. On the surface of the river floated a few small boats, and the voice of the ferryman drifted from afar, "I have entered the thunder abyss and my limbs have been turned into paste. My skull falls into the wilderness." His eyes turned to dust. "Eat my heart, red ants shine. Peck at my stomach, vulture vast. Only the soul would return. Only the soul will return. Only the soul returns, yesterday like flowing water." He seemed to have been here before. When was that? Taxian Jun looked around. Everything was so familiar, but as he thought about it more carefully, his mind went blank. "Hey, you!" Someone suddenly spoke behind him. He suddenly turned around, but saw nothing other than fireflies. The voice was very hazy and illusory. "You go ahead, I'll be right in front." Although being pointed out and told to do things was very annoying, he still couldn't resist his curiosity. With a sullen face, he walked towards the depths of the fireflies' dancing reeds. Soon he saw a dilapidated mill, a small, overgrown yard littered with broken shingles, and in the center of the yard, on a black slab of graphite, sat a man, his back to him, staring up at the sky. "Who are you?" When the man heard his voice, he did not turn around immediately. Instead, he sighed. I might be someone who wants to leave now. Leave? Where to? Before the man could reply, he asked in a slightly anxious tone, where is this place? The other side, the ghost realm. Did you see the river? If you ride on a bamboo raft and travel with the waves, you will head to the underworld. There, you'll have to wait 7 or 8 years for your reincarnation. Once you enter the gate, there will be a guard whose intestines will leak out of his body, measuring the merits of your entire life. Anyone who has committed a grave offense in life will be directly escorted to the 18 levels of the infinite hell. The man's tone remained gentle and soft as he spoke of the aftermath of death, as if he was reliving some past events. The first place you'll reach is called Nank Town, where there is a poor scholar who sells paintings, but he is probably not so poor now. I've burned a lot of paper money for him since. And there's also that old man who sells wontons. If we go further in, we'll encounter a palace that was built by the 4th king of the ghost world. What nonsense! What are you trying to say? The man was quiet for a moment, then suddenly asked, Taxian Jun, are you afraid of death? Taxian Jun laughed coldly, what's there to be afraid of? I thought so too. The man said, so, I chose to take poison and commit suicide. I used to think I had nothing else to ask of the world and that I was not afraid of death. After a pause, the man lowered his head. But I don't want to go now. He's still in the world and I can't let him go. After saying this, the man lightly jumped down from the graphite and circled under the clear moonlight from the dark shadow. The wind blew from the other side of the Soul River. For a moment, the air was misty and the fireflies gathered and dispersed. Taxian Jun's expression changed slightly. It's you. Mo Ran walked toward him. His chest was empty where a black hole was leaking air, his face was handsome, his nose was high and his eyebrows arched. He was almost the same as the first time they met at Mount Xiao. However, this time, he appeared much calmer. There was no longer confusion and fear that he had at that time. Why are you? As you can see, I'm not alive. But I don't know why. I seem to be different from the other soul as well. I've been through a lot, but there's no black and white impermanence that can rope me into the underworld. I've been wandering around here. Taxian Jun narrowed his eyes. You don't have to be nervous. With my spiritual core in your body, I won't be able to live any longer. Mo Ran looked towards the vast Soul River and said softly, but I don't want to leave either. I want to go back. Hearing that, Taxian Jun was startled at first. He raised his hand and placed it on his chest. After a moment of silence, he revealed a sinister smile on his face, your spiritual core is with me now. In other words, Hua Binan succeeded. He has done it and I will soon be free to come and go, and then. Before he could finish, he was interrupted by Mo Ran. Mo Ran turned his head and looked at him indifferently, do you know who Hua Binan is? He walked towards Taxian Jun and as he got closer, he raised his finger, which was emitting a white light and gently pointed it between his brows. Actually, it is useless to tell you. He's done something to you here and he'll get rid of a lot of things that will get in his way of manipulating you. However, since you still have a wisp of soul, you should at least remember some of it. Don't be so mindless and easily manipulated. He didn't know why, but the moment Mo Ran touched him, he suddenly felt an excruciating pain in his skull. It was as if fragments of him were flying past his eyes. What are you doing? Mo Ran did not answer. He only cupped his face and looked at him very quietly and somewhat sorrowfully. If you could only know the truth about everything, that would be great. You. This way, even if I leave, I can feel more at ease. Taxian Jun gritted his teeth and said, what truth? What nonsense? Let go of me. As he spoke, he furiously tried to free himself from the grip of Mo Ran, but he couldn't muster the strength to do so and the spell passed through the translucent body in front of him. Mo Ran closed his eyes and sighed softly, did you know? I really want you to see what I've experienced since my rebirth, and I really want you to have all of my memories. Perhaps it is because I am too stubborn that my soul has not been taken away. That is why I can see you here." As he spoke, he leaned forward and pressed his forehead against Taxian Jun. "Let's turn back. Forgive yourself." When he heard this line that was very similar to the one Chu Wanning had said before, Taxian Jun's entire body shook. However, before he could vent out his anger, a bloody scene flashed before his eyes. He once again saw the ghost world's heavenly rift. During the great calamity that had changed his life, everyone was too busy crying and struggling. Taxian Jun was floating in the air like a kite. The people below him were all wailing and screaming as blood splattered everywhere. He looked around. Where was Shimei? Where was Shimei? He could not find him, he could not find him. His heart was burning with fury. Suddenly, he stopped. Amidst the smoke, a familiar figure was moving. Taxian Jun flew over and was surprised to see that it was the him of his youth. Unconscious, dying. What was going on? As if answering him, the scene changed. Someone was carrying his broken body on their back, crawling through the mountains of corpses and the seas of blood with great difficulty. Who is it? Those bloody hands. Whose? He could no longer crawl, yet he was still unwilling to let go. Who was the person that was dragging him? Taxian Jun flew down to the ground and circled around the two men. He stared at the blood-soaked man whose face was hard to discern in the end. When he saw the man clearly, he felt as though he had been struck by lightning. Chu Wanning. How was this possible? How is this possible? Someone seemed to be angrily howling in his ear. Although the voice was far away, the person's anger was like a bayonet that pierced the heart. He bellowed, "The blood on the steps hasn't dry yet. That's the way he used to bring you home. The dragon pillar formation technique is reciprocal. Whatever damage you suffered, he also suffered the same. How can you say that he didn't save you? How can you say that he didn't save you?" His entire body felt cold. Taxian Jun opened his eyes all of a sudden, and his eyes were completely red. He stared at Mo Ran and gritted his teeth as he asked, "What are you showing me? If that was the case, ridiculous." He was filled with rage, but when he looked into the other's eyes, he suddenly froze. Mo Ran stared at him. His dark, calm eyes were actually moist. "I've tried my best to hand over all my memories to you. Who wants to see what happens between you and him? Who wants to know what happened after you were reborn? Yet, you betrayed Shimei. You are not the same as me at all." He was almost furious. "Who wants you to act on your own? Get lost." His rage has not stirred anything in Mo Ran's eyes. Mo Ran looked at him with pity in his eyes. He stood in front of Taxian Jun, and from the corner of his robes, a golden flame suddenly ignited. His ethereal body melted little by little, turning into specks of light. "Actually, you don't need to say anything. It's time for me to leave as well. I gave you all of my memories with my own soul energy. This is something that defies the will of the heavens. I don't know what will happen to me in the end." At this point, Mo Ran paused, then smiled. "Perhaps I will be tolerated by the 6 paths of samsara, or maybe I will be directly sentenced to the infinite hell. I've thought of the best possibility. Perhaps my soul can channel through the spiritual core and enter your body together with it." He did not care about what he said before, but when he heard this, he suddenly frowned. "Don't even think about it." Mo Ran looked at him with a smile that was not a smile. "Are you afraid? What's there to be afraid of?" Taxian Jun was deeply offended. He narrowed his eyes. "But this body belongs to me. Don't even think about seizing the treasure nest. You just don't want to accept the facts. You don't want to accept the truth that I've already admitted and you've turned a blind eye to. Shut up." Mo Ran looked at him calmly as the illusions disappeared faster and faster, instantly reaching his waist and chest. Before he disappeared, he raised his hand to try and touch the hair on the side of Taxian Jun's head. However, it was as if the Taxian Jun had been stung by some highly poisonous substance, and he took a step back in disgust. The specks of golden light in his body, like moths drawn to fire, suddenly surged towards the heart of Taxian Jun. He felt a familiar energy resuscitating within his body, a power that was blazing and fiery, like a river flowing beneath a rock. The power made him feel warm, but it also made him extremely disgusted. Don't even think about merging with my soul. I don't want to leave. I will try my best. Taxian Jun went berserk, get the hell out of here. But Mo Ran just stared at him. I'm sorry. In the end, I still have to fight with you for this body. If only your ability had recovered. Mo Wei. The golden flames quickly ignited the tip of his finger, engulfing that young and handsome face. Don't become Taxian Jun. As soon as he finished speaking. Destroyed like ashes. At the same time, the secret chamber of the Tianyan Pavilion was instantly illuminated by the blinding golden light. It was as bright as day, causing Shi Mei to be unable to open his eyes for a moment. He suddenly raised his robes to cover his face. Only after a long time did the intense light slowly fade away. Shi Mei had never been in a situation like this before. He suddenly waved his sleeves and looked inside the ice coffin with a pale face. Only to be suddenly met by a pair of dark, purplish eyes. Taxian Jun slowly sat up from within the coffin. His face was ice white and his lips had not recovered any color. He looked as if he had been carved out of cold jade and formed from dark spring water. Even his black robe that was embroidered with golden threads was suffused with a cold mist. The light that shone on his body also seemed to have frozen over. Taxian Jun raised his hand and placed his slender white fingertips on the edge of the coffin. Then, he rolled his eyes and looked at Shi Mei. Even though he knew that he was Shi Mei, under such a cold gaze, he couldn't help but take half a step back. You. With the jut in his throat bobbing up and down, Shi Mei forced himself to stay calm. You're finally awake. Taxian Jun did not answer. His face was extremely sinister, even more so than before. He was gasping for breath, his back was drenched in cold sweat while Grandmaster Mo's final smile was still flickering in front of his eyes. He closed his eyes, trying to sense if there were any unnecessary 3 or 6 souls in his body. Shi Mei stood at the side and saw the change in the expression on the other's face. He hurriedly placed his hand on his forehead and started chanting an incantation to calm the restlessness in the heart of Taxian Jun. How is it? After chanting the soul-suppressing curse, Shi Mei stared at his face and asked. Taxian Jun did not immediately reply. After a long while, he raised his hand and moved his 5 fingers. The manicured nails were like ice and did not have the slightest hint of blood on them. He rose from the coffin. I seem to have had a very long dream. Taxian Jun spoke his first sentence in a hoarse voice. Shi Mei's eyes were very wary, it's all fake. His Majesty's black robes were like clouds, and the golden threads were like water. He stepped out of the coffin and his expression was somewhat gloomy. I think so too. He stared at Shi Mei, and Shi Mei stared back at him. After a while, Shi Mei asked in a low voice, do you still remember who you are? There was a moment of silence. The cold and handsome man seemed to chuckle and his thin lips parted. Why don't you remember? The cultivator Emperor Taxian Jun, Mo Ran. He paused for a moment, lowered the curtain of his eyelashes, and made a lazy bow to the extremely rigid Shi Mei. I am willing to serve the master. A hint of ecstasy flashed through Shi Mei's eyes, but he still didn't dare to relax. He took out a crystal from his kinkan pouch. That thing was shining with a green luster and had a strange appearance. It was the strongest crystal used to test a cultivator's spiritual energy. His Adam's apple bobbed up and down in anticipation as he walked over and handed the crystal to Taxian Jun. Can you light it up? Taxian Jun's eyes roamed around it. He glanced at the rock coldly, then said slowly, How hard is that? As the sound of his voice faded, he clenched his fists tightly as the meridians in his hands bulged. In just an instant, the most powerful spiritual power in the world poured into it. Not only did the crystal instantly shine, there were even cracks appearing on its surface. Shi Mei held his breath as he stared at the stone, his eyes unmoving for a moment. Suddenly, with a crisp paw sound, the stone exploded between the pale and narrow fingers of the Taxian Jun and was then blasted into smithereens by the fierce spiritual energy. It turned into ash. What is this? Taxian Jun, however, casually flicked out the pinch of powder and sneered coldly, "Are you done playing around?" Shi Mei suddenly relaxed. He took a few steps back and sat down on a stone chair. It was the strongest battle force in the world. Did it finally belong to him now? Shi Mei couldn't help but tremble violently. The dim light in the stone room shone on his face. Was he in ecstasy? Or was it relief? The light was wobbly and not very clear, even eerie. After a long while, he saw Shi Mei bury his face into his hands, and mutter under his breath, "Mother, did you see that? I did it." He suddenly turned crazy. He got up and looked at the empty walls, then towards the stone room where no one else was. He shouted with all his might, "Did you see that? We're almost there. Did you all see that?" No one answered him. He began to laugh loudly in this empty secret room. Tears began to flow from his eyes as he laughed. They were drops of golden tears. They were exactly the same as the butterfly-boned beauty feast song Kai Yutong. End chapter.